Buenos días, señores y señores. Mi nombre es Enrique. Pardoname, sometimes I forget to speak in the English. My name is Enrique Esparza. And I am now 84 years young. In this, the year of our Lord, 1907. But I am still known as the boy of the Alamo. You ask me, do I remember it? I tell you, how could I forget? It is burned into my brain and indelibly seared there. And neither age nor infirmity could ever make me forget. For the scene was one of such horror that it could never be forgotten by anyone who witnessed it. All of the others are dead. I alone remain of those who were in the Alamo when it fell. And when I go to my final slumber in the Campo de Santos Cemetery in San Antonio, there will be no one left to tell the story. Oh, I wish I could tell you of all the great courage and bravery of those few Texians fighting against their cruel host. But it would take great words like those in your Bible or your songs to do them justice. And I know no such words. I was only 8 years old at the time, with 3 younger brothers and an older half-sister. My father's family have lived in San Antonio for many generations. And in the winter of 1835, my father's brother, Francisco, was drafted to serve in the army of then Mexican dictator General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna. And my uncle asked my father, Gregorio, to join him, but my papa said no, for he had been friends with the Americanos in San Antonio for a long time. And he had even helped them fight off and defeat the Mexican forces of General Cos in December. He had no intentions of leaving his home, his family, or his friend. I remember on February 23rd, as we were waiting for a wagon to be brought to take our family and others to safety in Nacogdoches, an Americano friend of my papa's, Senor John Smith, rode up on horseback, bearing the news that Santa Anna's army was near and would surely be upon us by nightfall. Now, we all know that Santa Anna would return to seek revenge for the embarrassing defeat in December. But no one expected his army to arrive as early as it did. But that madman force-marched his men in the dead of winter across the deserts of Texas, with little or no regard of the cost to his men. I then went across the town to see if I could spot the army coming. And to my surprise, as I ran across the main plaza, I saw the most splendid sight. There was a large army headed towards me on horseback. They wore bright red coats and blue trousers and white armbands crossed over their chest. Flags were flying and swords sparkling in the bright winter sun. And then riding in front was Santana himself. Oh, I could tell he was every inch the leader. I was very impressed. And then I ran back to tell my parents that the army had arrived. And I heard Senor Smith say that all the Tejanos who had befriended the Texians should retreat with them to the Alamo. And then my mama, whose name was Anna, asked my papa what he would do. And my papa said, well, I will go to the fort, of course. And then my mama said, well, then I will go too, and the children also. And my papa said, no, you must take the children to a safe place. And then my mama said, no, Gregorio, you listen to me. If you are going to stay and die, I want to be near you. And if they kill one of us, they will have to kill all of us. We gathered our belongings and several bags of food, and we made several trips back and forth to the Alamo. And at sunset, we crossed the bridge over the acequia, just as the trumpets of Santa Anna's army were blaring. And we made it just in time. And when we arrived at the Alamo, we saw that the doors were closed and barred. And my mama was furious. She pounded on the door and she said, abrir las puertas ahora mismo. Open the doors right now. One of the sentries who recognized my papa signaled us to come to a small window at the side of the chapel. And one by one, we were lifted through the window. And I distinctly remember I had to climb over a small cannon that had been placed in front of the window. And there were other cannons in the chapel also. And then I looked back through the window one more time, and I could see the blood-red flag of no quarter flying high over the Alamo, over the San Fernando church. And it meant death to all the men inside the Alamo who dared to defy Santa Anna. We were then taken to a small storeroom in the chapel, which had once been the sacristy. And there we slept on beds of hay. And there were other Mexican women and children there, along with an Americano woman named Mrs. Dickinson and her baby daughter. Now, we had not been there very long when a messenger came from Santa Anna demanding an unconditional surrender. And our commander, Senor Travis, knowing that he could receive no mercy at the hand of this cruel general, replied with a cannon shot. Santa Anna's answer were many cannonballs striking the walls of the Alamo. And the siege had begun. Now, Colonel Travis was a very brave leader. And I remember Senor James Bowie, who was very ill, had turned over his command to Travis. Now, my papa said he would rather follow Senor Bowie, for they had been friends for a long time. But he said he had learned to respect the brave young Colonel Travis. Oh, I remember Senor David Crockett of Tennessee. The Mexican soldados called him Cuaqui, or sometimes El Diablo. But we Tejanos at the Alamo always called him Don Benito, and I really don't remember why. He was very tall and long dark hair and black whiskers. And he seemed to be the leading spirit among the Texians, always at the head of the fight. He would go to the most exposed points and personally direct the fighting. He would fire from the rooftops and through the portholes, and then he would run back and say something funny to his men to make them laugh. Sometimes at night, he would come to our campfire to warm his hands, and he would say something funny in Spanish to make us laugh. One thing that frightened me very much, though, were the cannon. The noise they made was very terrible to me. It was like great thunder. The Indians called it black thunder. And today I can still hear that black thunder in my dreams. One day I noticed that Colonel Travis was very sad. And I heard him tell Senor Bowie that help would come. But help did not come. Colonel Travis, then, knowing that we would have to fight it out all alone, decided to give his men a choice of whether to stay and die or to go. I saw him draw a line in the dirt with his sword. And he said, all who are willing to stay and die with me, cross this line. And even Senor Bowie, who was too weak to stand, had his men carry his cot across the line. One man did not cross the line. His name was Rose. But up till then, he had fought as bravely as any man at the Alamo. But he said he was not ready to die. And he escaped over the walls later that night. Each day I did what I could to help my papa. One day I took him some food. And I said, Papa, why don't you stop and rest? You look tired. And then I said, with tears welling up in my eyes, I said, Papa, I am afraid for you. Afraid that you will be hurt or killed. And then my papa looked down at me with love in his eyes. And he said, Enrique, my son, I am not afraid to die. Not if it means that you and the others will be free. I promise you I will be careful. But if I am killed, you must be strong, son. You must become the man of the family and take care of your mother and the little ones for me. He then held me close and kissed me on the forehead. And I looked at him and I said, I will, Papa. I promise. The end came unexpectedly and with a great rush on that fateful 13th morning of March 6th. And after all had been dark and quiet for many hours, I had fallen into a profound slumber. But then I was rudely awakened by that noise again, that black thunder. And then I heard my mama say, Gregorio, the Mexican soldados are jumping the north wall. The fight has begun. And my papa grabbed his rifle and he went off into the fight. It was the last time I saw my papa alive. And then the cannons boomed and their shots crashed through the walls. I was so terrified that I crawled under the hay, but I could not keep from looking or hearing. And still today, those awful sights come to my eyes, and those terrible sounds still ring in my ears. And I could take it no longer. I broke away from my mama, and I ran into the courtyard to look for my papa. And then I saw the Sandinistas were rushing in on us as thick as bees. Inch by inch they were gaining ground. But for every Texian they killed, 5 of them fell. But the soldados fired on our men one at a time and struck them down with their escopetas. But our men would grasp the throats of their enemy and drive their knives deep into their hearts. And then I saw the most terrible thing. There were 2 Americano boys about my age with blonde hair. And each of them were lifted high, one in each hand of a cruel soldado. And he laughed and he crushed their heads together like cymbals. I screamed, and I ran as fast as I could back into the chapel. And I clung for my life against one of the walls. And then a body fell from the chapel wall at my feet. I screamed, and I looked down, and I saw the face of my papa. And then a hand touched my shoulder, and I was about to scream again. But it was my mama who had come to look for me. And I said, "Mama, is Papa?" And while cradling my baby brother in her arms, she knelt down and she kissed my papa goodbye. While my brothers and I clung to her skirts in fear. And then my mama took us back to the small storeroom where their women and children were. And we had not been there very long when some Mexican soldados entered our sanctuary. And I remember there was an Americano boy a few years older than me, standing to my right. He was unarmed. But a Mexican soldado slew him where he stood with his sword, and his body fell over me. And then another soldado held his bayonet at my mama's chest, and he said, "Tell me, where do the Americanos keep their money and their gold and their silver?" And my mama screamed, "I do not know. You go look for it, but leave us alone." And then he struck my mama in the face with the end of his rifle. And I screamed again. About that time, a Mexican officer entered the room and ordered the soldados to leave at once. We were then herded back through the chapel, dodging bullets the whole while. We then passed a small room where Senor Bowie had lain desperately ill on a cot. But now I saw his body laying on the floor, covered in blood and hideously mutilated. But a pile of dead Mexican soldados near him said that he sold his life dearly. When we were gathered at the front of the chapel, Mexicans were still firing into the dead bodies until lanterns could be brought to check for survivors. And it was then, as a lantern passed over my papa's body, that I saw the face of my papa for the last time. And under my breath, I said, "Adios, Papa. Te amo. Te amo." Outside the chapel doors, I saw the body of Senor Crockett lying high atop a heap of dead, bleeding Mexican soldados. And then to my surprise, I saw my Uncle Francisco. Now no one knew that he was in the army that lay siege to the Alamo. And when he saw me, he held me tight and he said, "Enrique, ¿eres tú? Is it you?" And then he asked, "What are you doing here? Where is your papa?" And with tears streaming down my face, I said, "Mi papa es muerto." And he said, "¿Qué? ¿Muerto? Mi hermano es muerto?" And I said, "Sí." And now with tears streaming down his face, he took me by the hand and he said, "Take me to your papa." And I led him back through the chapel. But when we entered the door, I stopped and I pointed to where my papa's body lay. I did not want to look upon it again. I said my goodbyes. It was my uncle's turn. And my uncle fell to his knees at my papa's body, and he cried for a long time. And then he lifted my papa onto his shoulders. And he took him to Santa Ana himself and asked permission to give him a proper burial in a cemetery in San Antonio. So my papa was the only Alamo defender given a proper Christian burial. Later that afternoon, all of the women and children were sent to Santa Ana's headquarters in a house near the main plaza. And I remember that laying on the table where Santa Ana sat was a pile of silver coins. Now my mama, who was beside me, was very quiet and very sad, but I could tell she was not afraid. I, however, was petrified, and I clung to her side for my life. Now Santa Ana was very quiet, but I could tell he was very angry. And then he looked at us and he said, "Tell me, why do you fight your own countrymen?" And my mama looked at him and said, "They are not our countrymen. We are Texians." And then all became deathly silent for what seemed like an eternity. And then Santa Ana stood, and I could tell he was seething with anger. And he looked at my mama, and he said, "I suppose if I were to let you live, that you would raise your children to fight against Mexico?" And my mama looked at him and said, "Yes, I will." And he said, "Woman, I should have your ears cut off. Get her out of here. Get them all out of here. Give them each a silver coin and 2 blankets, but get them out. Vámonos." We stayed in San Antonio several days with my uncle. And we had to endure that sickening smell of burning, rotting flesh, both of the Texians and of hundreds of Mexican soldados. I will never forget that smell. Often I would go to the plaza to watch the soldados. And several times I would see Santa Ana again. And he always had that cruel, hard look about him, very sinister. I will never forget that face. And it will haunt my dreams until the day I die. No tongue can describe the terror of that day. My mama, she told me many times, "Enrique, you must forget. You must forget all the horror of what you witnessed on that day." But I could not. I would not. No. I had to remember. To remember how my papa and others died so that we might be free. No. I will never forget. I will always remember the Alamo. Gracias, my friends, and gracias a Dios.
And his eyes turn sort of misty, and his heart begins to glow, and he takes his hat off slowly to the men of Alamo. To the 13 days of glory at the siege of Alamo.